A warm welcome to my YouTube channel Real Data Hero for the presentation, introduction and explanation of my analyses and graphics on official data concerning the COVID-19 disease, which I also offer for download on my Telegram channel. This video is the first in the new category NumbersPlus. Apart from analyzing the special development in the Seychelles, it is going to deal with the key issue of vaccination. I am going to compare the recommendations and explanations of the Seychelles Department of Health, the Robert Koch Institute in Germany, and the Swiss Federal Agency of Health. Furthermore, I will present a very interesting overview of the medical history of fighting pandemics with the example of smallpox and polio, as well as an update of our assessment of reports of health damages due to vaccination from the European Medicines Agency's databank of reported cases of adverse events following immunization, and from the Paul-Ehrlich Institute in Germany. I would like to thank you for your large interest in my sober presentations and illustrations. The goal of my labor is to contribute to the disentangling of the huge flood of information loaded with loads of highly emotional messages. Today's look at the Seychelles almost evokes holiday feelings. Let us get a read on the situation in a rational and cool-headed manner to pay a contribution to a level-headed orientation for the future of our children. First, I would like to retrieve the COVID-19 key data from our COVID-19 Key Figures website with the URL coronakarten.com. We can find the Seychelles as a tiny yellow dot next to the African coast in the Indian Ocean. The population of 97,741 corresponds to that of Friesland in northern Germany. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been 1,572 PCR positive cases in Friesland, 40 of which deceased. The Seychelles have registered 28 deaths from 6,373 cases. The case fatality is 5.8 times higher in the county of Friesland than in the Seychelles. Let's take a look at the timeline in the Seychelles and what is of special interest in their situation. On sheet 6, we can only find occasional blue bars up until the turn of the years 2020 to 2021. They show the case numbers with a maximum of 59 cases in week 26. From the beginning of the new year, distinctly increased case numbers hint to a new development. Sadly, there is no available data on the weekly number of tests for the Seychelles to examine how the new situation was dealt with in regard to testing activity. What we can take a closer look at is the sharp increase of the vaccination rate to 61.8% by now, which is very near the intended goal of a so-called herd immunity caused by vaccine immunization. This raises the question whether there are noticeable vaccination effects on the numbers of infections. In comparison, the vaccination rate in the German county of Friesland is only 8.21%. In the Seychelles, the case numbers during the phase of the vaccination campaign are higher than those registered in 2020. There were a total of 297 positive tests reported for the whole of the past year, but 7,875 cases have been registered since the first week of January of this year. As we sadly have no way to set up a relation to the total number of tests, we can only suspect but not prove a changed testing strategy as cause for this increase. The recent numbers report 500 new cases on May 3rd and a new record number of 1,799 cases on May 10th. There is no indication of a calming down of infection due to the advancing vaccination campaign. On the contrary. Sheet 7 shows the deaths subscribed to a positive COVID-19 test. In the whole of 2020, there was no death reported. The first one reported was on January the 4th, 2021, and the vaccination campaign started after 3 deaths had been reported. For the first quarter of 2021, there is no visible change in development during the vaccination measures. Because the Seychelles have the highest vaccination rate worldwide, I would like to suggest whether the achieved vaccination coverage of the population should not be used for a scientific case study on the achieved rate of protection as well as the safety of the vaccines. Due to the nature of it being islands and the distinct travel restrictions, we have a literally ideal closed-off cohort that could lead to important findings which would finally benefit world health and safety. So many people put their great hope into the vaccination. Valid data would be of invaluable worth for the transparent information of the global population. The first curves already illustrated that the Seychelles reacted to the increasing number of positive tests at the beginning of the year and also in connection with sporadic deaths by starting a systematic vaccination program for the whole population. The detailed vaccination status report of the Ministry of Health is issued daily. It shows that on May 5th, 70.1% of the population had been vaccinated once and already 61.8% twice, whereas the vaccination coverage for Friesland, Germany is 8.21% at the moment. Germany's strategy aims at a nationwide, consistently increasing step-by-step immunization, whereas a fast and total vaccination coverage seems at hand in the Seychelles. The option to quickly supply single, especially afflicted counties comparable with the Seychelles with a high vaccination rate has so far not been considered by the plannings in Germany. Considering Chancellor Merkel's optimistic statement that vaccinated people were no longer involved with events of infection, strategic prioritized vaccination programs for hotspot counties with an especially high incidence would offer the possibility to create reassurance and at the same time help gain valuable insights about the effectivity of the concept. Due to the vaccination report, there are solely 2 different vaccines being used in the Seychelles. The vaccine Sinopharm, based on conventional mode of action, and the mRNA vaccine Covishield by AstraZeneca, which is also the preferred vaccine used in India. On their website, the Ministry of Health makes very general promises about the effectiveness of the vaccination, which in their wording are to be understood as courage boosters. No scientific background or a reference to the studies leading to the vaccine's approval are offered. The seal of the WHO is apparently supposed to create further trust. The next segment is about information on the COVID-19 vaccination in Germany and in Switzerland. Sheet 11 shows chosen information about the vaccination from the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin. I want to present the statement by the Robert Koch Institute uncommented. Quote, "The protective COVID-19 vaccination available since the end of 2020 plays a key role in the fight of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. All 4 currently EU and Germany approved COVID-19 vaccinations have a proven high protective effect against the severe case of COVID-19. The systematic review published in the Epidemiological Bulletin 19/2021 deals with the question to what extent vaccinated persons can still get infected and possibly infect others if they get in contact with SARS-CoV-2. When considering them in their entirety, the available data suggest that the COVID-19 vaccination reduces virus transmission to a considerable extent, and that completely vaccinated persons play no significant role in relation to the epidemiology of the disease." The chart in the epidemiological bulletin, which the quoted paragraph refers to, is supposed to visualize the mechanisms of action for the reduction of mortality, hospitalizations, and severity of disease progression. There are no numbers or scientific studies listed providing evidence for the presented scale of intended symptom reduction. Quote number 2 from the epidemiological bulletin. All 4 currently in the EU and Germany approved vaccines, Comirnaty by BioNTech Pfizer, COVID-19 vaccine by Moderna, Vaxzevria by AstraZeneca, COVID-19 by Janssen, have a proven high protective effect of at least 80% against a severe case of COVID-19, already from the approval trials or in subsequently carried out non-randomized observational studies respectively. I would just like to note that randomized studies are considered to be a necessary standard of quality for scientific papers. The given number of 80% could be the basis for the graph shown before. Sheet 12 shows excerpts from the information on the topic of vaccination of the Federal Agency of Health in Switzerland. The left block of text shows the goals of the vaccination in regard to the dangers and risks of COVID-19. I want to stress the given case fatality rate of 1%. It will be referred to later within the historical comparison. The block of text on the right is ultimately a general argument for the general benefit ascribed to vaccinations against contagious diseases. There is a reference to the protection of the vaccinated, but indirectly also of the unvaccinated. In the lower part, it is interesting to see the tabular overview of the approved vaccines in Switzerland, as well as the state of the approval process. In Switzerland, contrary to the 4 approved vaccines in Germany, only 2 so-called mRNA vaccines are currently approved, namely the Pfizer-BioNTech one and the Moderna vaccine from the USA. The approved ages are at 16 and 18. There is a surprising statement in the report, I quote, "Surprisingly, we did not find any peer-reviewed paper on the clinical phase 3 study for the Janssen vaccine COVID-19. I would like to point out that vaccines always have to pass an approval process made up of 3 phases until they are licensed. I am not going to elaborate on the statements about effectiveness nor the studies on which the approval process are based. With an approval, an evaluation is made by the responsible approval agency. For the whole of Europe, that is the EMA. While the Swiss Federal Agency of Health is ascertaining 2 doses of 4 of the 5 vaccines as specified by the manufacturers, I would like to put the focus on the statement from Pfizer's executive Albert Bourla on sheet 13, who regards a 3rd shot as a brush-up and subsequently a yearly vaccination as necessary. It is unclear whether this statement is based on new scientific studies or whether business interests have also to be taken into account. He considers the variants or mutations as crucial. With the usage of vaccines and the planning of extensive vaccination programs, there should be a benefit-risk assessment in each case. This entails the assessment of risks for separate groups of population. A special focus should be put on people with medical predispositions, but also especially on children, for who, in their decisive phase of their physical, mental, and psychological development, side effects could mean lifelong consequences and handicaps. Because COVID-19 is being documented especially thoroughly for all age groups by the Swiss Federal Agency of Statistics, on sheet 16, I'm firstly showing the proportion of the 2 youngest age groups from 0 to 9 and from 10 to 19 in relation to case numbers with a positive test. The pink line shows the number of deaths with a positive test. You can easily see the 2 waves in the graph. It is interesting that case numbers for the two youngest age groups are lowest within the area of these waves, and they significantly rise again afterwards. This can be correlated to the significant rise in numbers of tests performed. In my opinion, sheet 16 does not need any further interpretation in regard to the impact on the two age groups for severe and deadly cases of COVID-19. Shown are the 3 documented deaths so far ascribed to COVID-19 for these age groups. A possibly wrongfully neglected area of medical science in connection with pandemic control is medical history, which specifically offers numerous examples of pandemic control strategies. I would like to go into historic detail regarding 2 diseases which caused fear and alarm through their especially severe and dramatic disease progressions, and which are counted as especially successful examples for widespread vaccination campaigns: polio or poliomyelitis and smallpox. There can be found contradictory media reports that the cruel and lethal disease polio has returned to Europe. In contrast to that, the Robert Koch Institute and other media are saying the disease is close to extinction. The description of the disease on the medical online portal speaks of a viral disease. Quote, "Most patients have no or only mild symptoms. Yet for some people, polio has a severe disease progression which can lead to life-threatening paralyses and other permanent damages. It is also possible that many years after the infection, long-term damages can occur. In the past, the disease has repeatedly led to epidemics and many fatalities." Polio had its zenith in Germany in the 1950s and 60s with up to 10,000 cases. Surprisingly sudden, but counted as a great success, was the abrupt decline of registered cases immediately after a recommendation to vaccinate against polio had been introduced with the Federal Epidemic Law of 1961. Until 1997, oral vaccinations were performed containing a live vaccine. In Germany, the last registered case stems from 1990. A continuation of the recommendation to vaccinate is justified with the prevention of a possible recurrence of the virus due to lacking immunization. Today, many, but not all, pediatricians give shots of a quadruple combination of inactivated vaccines against tetanus, polio, pertussis, and diphtheria. Already with the beginning of such vaccination campaigns, criticism of vaccinations was established. In regard to polio, the causal correlation between virus and disease has been disputed. One points to the extensive use of DDT and the symptoms of DDT poisoning, which are absolutely similar to those of polio. The images show the thoughtless use of DDT, especially on children, which were sprayed with the poison to protect them from insects. For DDT poisoning, the database for clinical toxicology reports signs of paralysis and death. Children were especially affected because DDT was stored in fatty tissue and was absorbed with the milk, which plays a special part in child nutrition. Of course, this poses a matter of dispute about the cause of disease, which I do not wish to interfere with my personal judgment of the issue. Maybe in this case, the specialization of medicine is actually a problem in order to arrive at a truly valid evaluation. The virologist will proudly present a virus that was discovered within the context of disease progression, made visible with lots of effort under an electron microscope, and can be presented to the public. The toxicologist and environmental epidemiologist tries to look at the environment of a disease event and, where appropriate, measures the toxic loads of patients. They, same as the virologists, stand before the crucial and difficult task of finding proof of a detected toxin as the causal agent for a disease. Both disciplines must not lose sight of the afflicted patient with their mode of approach. I would like to throw these thoughts back into the court of the specialists to maybe facilitate new concepts of professional exchange, as it is partly successfully being implemented in specialized departments for holistic medicine within large university hospitals in the form of multidisciplinary collaboration. On sheet 20, I'm looking at smallpox, which over the course of centuries has again and again caused epidemic outbreaks and has to be regarded as one of the big plagues. I want to spare you horrific images as I did with polio before, but I also don't want to withhold how dramatic some reports read. For example, in a study about smallpox in the canton of Bern in Switzerland from the 18th and 19th centuries. Doctors report that they had to helplessly stand by and watch afflicted children lose the fight with a gruesome death. However, such reports and pictures are often used to get people to agree to the promised benedictory vaccination. Interesting for me was the also very dramatic report of the last outbreak of smallpox in the Sauerland area in Germany in 1970, which I have no memory of despite it being close to where I was living at the time. 4 fatalities were deplored, and in extreme consequence they executed quarantine measures which were especially lauded by the WHO. But the panic in the population went as far as people from the afflicted town of Meschede not being able to get fuel for their cars due to fear of contagion. The decline of smallpox in Switzerland is illustrated with the graph on the right. To the left, you can see a report of the State Health Department of Lower Saxony in Germany on the status of immunization and evaluation of a possible threat because of smallpox in the face of an immunologically totally insufficient basic immunity within the population, for which until the mid-1970s there was a mandatory vaccination. The danger is estimated very high, with a fatality rate of 30%. I would like to remind you of the report of the Swiss Federal Agency of Health on the danger posed by COVID-19, which was calculated at 1% of cases. There is an explicit reason given for nonetheless refraining from reinstating the smallpox vaccination. Quote, "Why is the smallpox protective vaccination not reinstated? The smallpox vaccination has caused severe complications and side effects in the years of its realization. The so-called encephalitis was especially feared, an inflammation of the brain that often ended in death or caused severe lasting damages. It occurred in approximately 1 to 4 cases of 1 million vaccinated. We should memorize the risk assessment of 1 to 4 severe health damages or deaths in 1 million vaccinated. The officially presented statistics proving the success of the vaccination measures must not hide the fact that many of these programs were faced not only with euphoric cheers, but also with vehement criticism, including that from the circle of renowned authorities. Statements from such experts from the year 1890 read like veritable current conspiracy theories that keep our media so busy at the moment. I would like to quote a couple of statements as examples. The vaccination is much worse than the smallpox. The vaccination causes diseases that are much more dangerous than smallpox. The vaccination can lead to death. The health of the general population has worsened since the introduction of mandatory vaccination. The introduction of the mandatory vaccination has increased the overall mortality. This tickles my statistical curiosity, because numbers which prove such statements would have to play an essential part in the discussion for the vested interest of public health. The next statement deals with a similar aspect. Where mandatory vaccination was cancelled, child mortality decreased. The doctors performing the vaccinations cannot be held responsible for damages resulting from vaccination. Here, please note the current regulations on liability for COVID-19 vaccination damages. The vaccination is so dangerous, yet smallpox is so easily curable. As always, a thorough insight in order to study the sources is made available with the accompanying PDF file in my Telegram channel. My research group carefully studies the safety reports of the European Medicines Agency, EMA, and analyzes the data by comparing them with numerous national reports on the side effects of drugs. Sheet 23 shows a selection of national agencies authorized with reporting of vaccination side effects on the right. The complete list can be found on the EMA website. In the PDF document, the images are linked to the websites. To the left, you see named the European agency responsible for the acquisition of those data, EMA, and the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, which has developed a registration app for an observational study which a very high percentage of vaccinated people took part in. The EMA records side effects for each vaccine respectively and publishes the results in the form of separate Excel tables. The Paul-Ehrlich Institute publishes its safety reports in irregular intervals, which we have thoroughly analyzed and juxtaposed them with the EMA data. Sheet 24 illustrates the current status of reports from national sources or centralized from the EMA with a bar chart where we can see that excluding the Netherlands, there are obvious differences between the two data sets. Whether this is due to a lag in data transfer can only be surmised. The Paul-Ehrlich Institute's report on vaccine reactions sets a number of guidelines for reportable complications, which I enlarged on sheet 25 from the official document. Next to several individual symptoms categorized as usual reactions to vaccinations, the last paragraph refers to, I quote, symptoms of disease which are clearly based on a different causation than the vaccination. Those are not reportable. I leave the interpretation of this limitation on reportable side effects to the viewer, just as the Paul-Ehrlich Institute intends. The safety report of the EMA from May 7th states 404,555 reported side effects and 6,786 deaths in connection with COVID-19 vaccinations. The data bank collects European cases, and with its non-liability clause, it protects itself by pointing out that a report does not prove a causal connection and reflects the opinion of the reporting person. In Germany, doctors, therapists, but also afflicted recipients can, for instance, use the SafeVac app to report problems. The diagram on the right of the sheet shows the timeline of reports according to each vaccine, which as a result of increase in vaccinations has logically also increased. In the table on the left, you see the reported number of suspected cases categorized into a selection of 20 especially severe adverse events, showing the respective proportions for each vaccine. The size of these proportions is portrayed in relation to the total number of reported cases due to the lack of information about the number of doses of each vaccine. An especially frequent complication after vaccination are thromboses, which sometimes run a severe course and may be fatal. For example, the cerebral vein thrombosis, which had AstraZeneca feature in media reports and led to restrictive use of their vaccine in certain age groups. Some countries like Denmark or Switzerland have currently excluded this vaccine from their vaccination campaigns. The Swissmedic Agency of Switzerland has a report which sheds a light on risk evaluation for severe adverse effects and fatalities after vaccination. The percentage of reported deaths in relation to the total number of vaccinations is 0.008%, 76 deaths. Swissmedic's risk analysis on the benefit risk assessment reads, "The received and analyzed reports on adverse effects so far do not change the positive benefit-risk profile of the COVID-19 vaccines used in Switzerland." For the interested viewer, I have the risk assessment of the Department of Health of Lower Saxony in Germany, which advised against vaccination against smallpox when the risk was 1 to 4 adverse effects cases per million vaccinated. That is a 0.0004% risk, although it also stated an insufficient protection status in the population and a risk of death of 30% for the infected. I refrain from evaluating this opposing juxtaposition. Maybe not all of the reasons considered for Swissmedic's assessment were published. The treated subjects are very emotionally loaded, and there are conflicting opinions on them. I want to make absolutely clear that it is not my intention to make accusations or deepen divides of opposing opinions. Only when controversies and problems are discussed and their backgrounds drawn into the light can there be a way out of possible contradictions and discrepancies for the many people it concerns. We especially have to use our rational and scientific resources and not fight wars of opinion that lead to deeper trenches instead of solutions, particularly with a global problem such as the declared pandemic. For this reason, the first example of the Seychelles could lead to important empirical findings through thorough studying of the situation. In case the presented sheets on the topic raised your curiosity, I would, as always, like to encourage you to do your own research. The accompanying PDF file is freely available in my channel on Telegram, and in the discussion group there, you have the possibility for further exchange. I hope my presentation shed some light on the topic and that it succeeded in showing a true depiction of the situation, as well as put the medical aspects into the right context beyond the pure statistical content. This video will be published in 4 more languages shortly. For the support in translation and recordings in English, French, Italian, and Spanish, I would like to express my sincere gratitude. If you like this video and my work, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and join the Telegram group Real Hero to get notified on future updates and videos. There you can also find numerous additional information. There will be further international topics and data published there.